Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Can someone just confirm in chat that you can hear me? Great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Ido,
And I'm Daniel.
and we're going to be teaching you about databases and MongoDB. So can anyone just in chat generally describe what a database is? Or you can also request to talk. Just the general idea. Okay, yeah. No, people don't know. That's fine. That's why you're here. Does anyone have any vague idea? A bunch of files? Somewhat. Okay. Several people typing.
Set of tables is pretty good.
Data storage. So these are all fairly good responses. So generally, a database is a collection of information and data that is stored electronically. So just having a paper in a drawer is not enough to be called a database. It has to be electronic. It has to be easily accessible, efficiently accessible, and you're supposed to be able to get and store information whenever you like. So if you went to the database workshop, you should remember we have a backend and a client, right? So typically in an application, you'd have the backend communicating back and forth with the database to store information and fetch information, and then process that information to send it to the client. Okay. So if anyone was in the backend workshop, you learned more about this side and some of this side. The React workshop was about this side. So today we're going to be focusing on databases.
So some of you might be wondering, like, why can't you just store everything in files? Like, what's even the point of a database? Well, storing data within files can become pretty messy and difficult to manage once you have like a large amount of information. So say a company wants to store like their employee information, such as like their pay and stuff like that. Once they have like a couple thousand employees, it's gonna become pretty difficult to manage all of their information if you're just storing all that in like a single file, say. And databases are like what they do is they make it more efficient to access the information and also filter the results. So with the database, you're able to write queries to search for the data, and you can filter out the results based on like what you want these results to include. So for a company, you could say they want to see which employees have a pay within a certain range, and you can also limit the results you get back and stuff like that. And you can write these queries within your code, like if you have a program, it can be you can grab information from your database within it, and we will be doing something like that today with MongoDB. And finally, data can be stored in a structured way, making it much easier to manage and scale. SQL databases are really good for when your information is like in tables and you have a predefined structure, and that all your data follows a structure, and so it's pretty easy to find what you're looking for. And because databases store vast amounts of information, and there's pretty efficient methods in place for you to search through them, it's much easier to add more data and keep on managing it as you go.
Okay, so when you want to store data, there's a lot of formats you can use. You can use XML format, but MongoDB and a lot of other databases use what's called a JSON format. So JSON is very much like dictionaries, but it's more formalized in a file format. So JSON stands for JavaScript file notation, which is a lot of jargon, but if you say JSON, everyone's going to understand what you mean. So you can just say JSON. So if you remember dictionaries from 108 or 148, it's very similar. You have a key, which is a string, and then you have a value, which is either an array, an object, or string, number, anything you want. So MongoDB used the JSON format to store its information, and you learn about what's called documents later, but essentially each object in the database, each like unit in the database is called a document, and that uses JSON format. So here's an example JSON file. It's very basic. So you can see here you have the username in blue, which is the key, and you have the value, which is cool user 123. You have a password, which is a different key, and you have too cool to guess as the password. And you have the value, and the key is friends. So key is in blue, and values are in orange, as you can see.
So now we've been talking about databases, but then there's two types of databases here. We have a SQL database and a NoSQL database. So like, what's the difference? A SQL database is a database that stores the data within tables that contain columns and rows, and these tables can be related to one another. Since SQL databases are relational, they are something we call a relational database management system. You can connect information from within different tables using keys. So you would have things called primary keys in the rows of one table that would point to each of the different pieces of data. And you would also have foreign keys, which will connect a row of data in one table to data within another table. And we won't be going too in depth into a SQL database, but it's still pretty useful to know, especially when you're trying to store data that's organized in specific ways, and you know that all the new data you're going to be adding on is going to be following this same structure. SQL databases, as their name suggests, use SQL, which is structured query language, in order to access and manage the data. This language allows you to modify and access the data stored within the database. It's really good for complex queries, but it can also be pretty restrictive since it requires you to know how the data within your database is structured. So any new data you add must also be following this structure. And finally, it's pretty difficult to modify your data structure later on in a SQL database, because it can, if you do, you can mess up like the rest of the systems and programs that you already made that are already using your database. And moving on to a NoSQL database, these databases store their data within documents, which we just heard, JSON documents, or more specifically BSON, which is binary versions of JSON documents. And they use three different methods to store this information. They use key value storage, column-oriented storage, and graph databases. So a key value storage is a lot like the Python dictionaries that you may already be using in CSE 108, 148, where each file has a key and which we would call a field and a corresponding value in it. For a column-oriented storage, it's used when your NoSQL databases are you store information within columns rather than rows. As you can see on the right here, there's such thing like a name column, a grade column, and GPA column, and each of the data within these rows have IDs, which you can use to grab information from the database. And finally, a graph database, we use nodes, which store data within these nodes, and there's edges that define relationship between the different pieces of data. So these are mainly used for finding relationship properties within your data, and they have uses in things like fraud detection and also providing user recommendations. You can detect fraud by, like, say, connecting an email address that someone put in or a credit card with a known fraud case from beforehand, based on the relationships you can see in your database. And you can also provide recommendations to users for like what they want to buy based on what they previously bought from your website. And so querying these relationships is pretty efficient since these relationships are stored in your database beforehand. So when a query is made, it's just the database knows like what the relationship is, so it's going to be pretty fast. Your NoSQL databases are useful for when the data is unstructured. So a document in a database can have different structure from another document within the same database, and they can contain different pieces of information, and they don't need to follow like one same structure. So you have dynamic schemas, and you can modify the structure of the document, and you don't need to update every other document when you do this.
So what is MongoDB? We mentioned a lot so far, but MongoDB is essentially a NoSQL database, which we learned about before. So it lets developers store the data in a flexible manner. It's free to use. It's gained popularity over the last few years because it's really easy to use, it's really easy to maintain, and it's generally good performance. It has a lot of applications, and you can use it for any app you want to make, or most apps you want to make. We'll talk about which apps you can't later. And yeah, it can be used for applications, content management systems, mobile apps, and more. So let's talk about the differences between MongoDB and MySQL. Has anyone even heard about MySQL? Oh, I see a question in chat. Feel free to just type in chat if you have any questions. Don't request to speak yet. You'll have a Q&A later where you can speak. So people have heard of it. Has anyone not heard of MySQL? Don't be shy. It's a database workshop. It's fine if you haven't heard of it. Okay, so some people haven't heard of it. So MySQL is a different type of database system. It lets you store data in what's called a table. Just imagine like an Excel sheet. It's more complicated than that, but imagine an Excel sheet with rows and columns, and every value, every document is like a row. Every user is like a row, and every column is a different type of value. For example, you have username column, password column, address column, anything you want to store. So the difference between MongoDB and MySQL is, first of all, MongoDB is a NoSQL database, and MySQL is, by the name, SQL database. So SQL lets you store rigid data structures, and they enforce uniformity, and it's less error prone. MongoDB lets you have more flexibility at the cost of sometimes performance, depending on your data, and it's more error prone to bugs if you don't code it right. And MySQL has this really great system for managing relationships between documents. For example, friends on Facebook, which MongoDB doesn't have. But MongoDB does have a lot of benefits, such as performance and scalability.
So some of the basics about MongoDB, like we've already covered a little bit, but you can see on the diagram on the right, your database will contain multiple collections, and each of these collections, which can each use different schemas, will contain multiple documents stored in a BSON format, and each of these documents will store an ID, this underscore ID variable here, which is the ID for that document, and you can use this to search for a specific document. Within your document, you will have field value pairs. So here you could have like a name field, age field, birthday field, and you can perform queries to search for these specific things within your database.
So to get started with MongoDB and create your database, we're not going to be going and installing MongoDB and hosting it on our machine because it's going to take too much time and we only have an hour. So can everyone go into mongodb.com/atlas? We're going to post the link in chat. So once everyone has that open, we can proceed. Oh, and by the way, at any time during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to post it in chat. We'll have plenty of people who are willing to answer. Okay, so once you're in this page, can you click on try free? Is everyone okay with that so far? If you have any questions, just post them in the chat. Okay, so once you've done that, you should be prompted with a sign up form like this. So fill in your details, email, password. You can skip the company field. It's not required. Just make your account. Okay, so everyone's good with that? Okay, now you have to verify your email address. After you do that, we can proceed with the next steps. Can someone just confirm they're following along so far? Okay, everything's working fine. Okay, thank you. Okay, so once you're done with your email address, you'll be prompted with this screen. If you're not prompted with this screen, you can probably find it by making an organization and whatnot. But if you're not prompted with the screen, that means you're not a user, so you should probably be able to figure it out. So once you're in this screen, it will say deploy your database. By default, it's on M10, which is $8 per hour. But we want the free version because we don't need all these premium features. We're fine with shared CPU, and we don't need the advanced features. Everything else you can leave on default. The region is fine. Provider AWS is perfect. And then once you're done, you can click create. Okay, so just like I'll give you guys 5 minutes to catch up. Okay, so is everyone good with that so far? Do we have everyone past this screen? Okay, good. Okay, so this is the um, hardest part, most important part, I would say. So you have to create a database user. This is different from your account, the Atlas user. This is specifically for this database. So just create a username. If you want to follow along with us, name it demo user, and then generate the password. Make sure you have the password written down somewhere or you remember it, because you will need it later. Okay. So once you're done with that, the next screen, it's still the same screen, just scroll down. You have IP access list. This is essentially a really nice feature of MongoDB. It lets you configure where people can access your database from. So like only you can access your database and no one else can. For now, we'll just let everyone access it and disable this feature because we want to just keep things simple and we don't have any sensitive data in there. So just type 0.0.0.0 to let everyone in your database. And then once you're done with that, you can press add entry and then finish and close. Okay, so once you're done with that, you should be in this screen. Has everyone managed to do it? Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Okay, so you should be at this screen and you should have your database here and the connect option here. Okay,
So the next steps are going to be to actually connect to your database through your Python code. So what you want to do beside the name of your database demo, you should see a button that says connect. So just press on that. And the next window you'll see a couple options on the screen. You want to click on connect to your application, which should be the second one on the screen, I think. And then when you're inside of that, it'll ask you for the driver, set that to Python, and it will ask you to choose the version. So just choose whatever Python version you're using. And once you've done that, on the bottom, it should show your connection string. So copy that to your clipboard.
okay, so does
And
anyone
now
have any questions? No
we should
questions?
send them the code now.
Okay. Do you have the code? Or should I? I'll send it. Okay. So if you look in the chat, I sent main.py, which is a Python file containing the example we're going to be using today. So if everyone can download it and open it in their favorite IDE, either PyCharm or VS Code or whatever else you prefer, then we can get started. And again, if you have any questions, just send them in the chat. Okay, so take like 5 minutes to just look over the file, read the comments, read what you're supposed to do. We'll show you how to do everything later, so don't get started on it now unless you can or if you want to. But we'll go over everything with you. Just take like 10 minutes to look over the file. Does anyone have any questions about the starter code? Did everyone read it over? Is it clear? Is everyone done looking at the starter code? Can we proceed with the next connection to the database? Okay. So
hopefully you've opened up the demo file now. In your whatever IDE you're using, if you're using PyCharm or VS Code, you should be able to access your terminal. So please open that up and type in the command pip install pymongo. Also, you need to make sure you have pip installed already. If you don't, you could just quickly Google it to how to install it for your operating system.
if you run into any errors or troubles, make sure to write in the chat. We can help you. Okay, so once everyone has done that, we can
So
proceed
now
with the connection.
yes, we're gonna be like creating the connection to our database. So at the very top of your file, underneath all the import statements, you can write out this line here on the slide, client equals Mongo client. And within the connection string, that's where you're going to paste the connection string we copied from MongoDB Atlas. So please do that. And once you put the connection string in, you'll see inside that string there's a place that has a password field. So you want to erase that and just paste in the password for the user account you made in your Atlas account, the one we told you to write down. And additionally, on macOS, sometimes it might give you a connection error, so you will have to add this additional argument, TLS CA file equals certify where. You just add that on at the end. Even if you're on Windows, I think you can still add it and it wouldn't make a difference, but in case you're having issues.
Yeah, I would just say add it just in case. It doesn't hurt.
We could switch over to the code now and type this in.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, can everyone see it? Okay. So first thing we need to do with the client, which we have loaded right here, your connection scripting would look something like this. This is the username, this is the password. So if you just see something like this, you should put in your password, the password you set before, and put it here instead of the password, the generic thing. Okay. So once you have the client, you want to get the database. So database, and we call it demo. So we can just say database equal to client demo. Okay. So what this does, it gets the demo database from the client, from the server, which is fetched from here. Okay. Once we have that down, we can do collection. We can create a collection. From the database, we want to get the user collection or create it if it doesn't already exist. Okay. So this code right here, it connects to the database server, it gets the right database, and then it creates a user collection. Okay, so now we want to register the user. Oh, I will send you the answers at the end, but you should follow along and try to understand the code. But everything will be, oh, you can't see it. Okay. I'll try to change the quality of the stream, but this is the code we have so far. I'll send it in the chat. Can you see it better now?
Oh yeah, increasing font size could help.
Is that in settings? Is this any different?
No, the code didn't change.
Oh. There we go. Okay, I'll return this to default. Okay, is this better? Okay, so can everyone see this all right? Okay. So we have the collection, the user's collection, and we have the demo database. So now we want to implement this function, which is register. So we have a username handed to us and we have a password. And we want to add a new user to the collection. So we can do collection.insert1, and then the document we want to insert. So in this case, it's just username, password, like this. And what this does is it inserts into the collection we have here, it inserts this document whenever we call this function. Okay. So this function, you provide it with a username and a password, and it inserts it into the collection.
We should also have a balance.
Yeah, we're making a bank account, so we'll add a balance, and we can set it to 0 at the start. Okay. So we have a new document in the collection every time we call this function. Okay, does this make sense so far? Any questions? No? Okay. So the next function asks us to check if a user exists already or not with this username. So we can just return, and then we can try to find this username by its username, like this. But we don't want a user object, we want a boolean, so we can convert it to bool. So what this function does is it takes an object and checks to find a document with these specifications. So in this case, we just pass in a user object, a username object, and it checks if we have a username with this user. Okay, does this make sense? Okay, thank you for responding. So this function is already made for us, and it calls the register user, and it uses the does user exist method we just created. So it's already made for us. So now we have a challenge. I want you guys to take 5 minutes and try to implement this function with what we learned so far, and then we'll take it up. And if you have the solution, just write it in chat. Okay, so does anyone have any guesses as to how we should do it? Any general direction where we can start off with? Okay, the hint is that we should use the find one method of the collection. That's the hint. Exactly that. So exactly has Annie Master 7 wrote in chat. We can just use the find one method like we did last time, but instead of returning a boolean, we just return the object. So that's that. We just find the user exactly like we did here, and we return it. So this sign-in method has already been implemented for us. It's just basic Python code. There's no Mongo part here. They're just using this method we created to fetch the user, and then they're validating the input. And not accessing the property of the user as they would if it was any other dictionary. Okay, so casting it to a boolean just returns if it's none or not. So if I had something like something like this, does this make sense? So just checking if it exists or not. No problem. Okay, so the next method we have to implement is the deposit method. So for this method, they're asking us to change the user to update it. Oh, we have a question in chat. So they're from the collection. They're from this PyMongo library. From the collection class, we have an option. We have a method called insert1 and find1, and that lets us to append or change this database, this collection. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next method would be deposit, and then you guys can try out withdraw on your own. It would be very similar to deposit. So to deposit, we can just do collection dot update one because we want to update the collection. Wait, 1 sec. We forgot the starter code here. Okay, so this starter code was supposed to be given to you in the method, which is an outdated version. So this is how the method should look like. I'll send it in chat. So we just want to change the current user and we want to update the database. So we just have to update the database here. So we can do collection update one. Then we can do username current user username to find the username. And then we tell MongoDB what we want to do with this user. We want to increment balance by amount. Okay. Does this make sense? Does anyone have any questions about this line? So this is what's called an operator in MongoDB.